Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Parashat Pointers. This week's message is dedicated by Leah and Lilian Cohen in honor of Joey and Jody Cohen and Morris and Joyce Srour. This week's Parashat Noach, we have a very, very powerful pasuk. And this pasuk talks about how Noah was supposed to put the animals into the teva because the whole world was going to be flooded. And one of the most interesting things and what makes this pasuk so powerful is that it teaches a very, very deep lesson. The pasuk says of the clean animals, of the animals that are not clean, of the birds and of everything that creeps on the ground. These are the types of animals that Noah was commanded to bring. But there's a very, 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 very big issue here. Because when the pasuk says the kosher animals, i.e. the clean, it means tahorah. And the way you would say non-clean, you would say time'ah, impure. However, the Torah goes out of its way and adds another 8 letters to say enena tahora, that it's not tahor, so that it should not use words, if it's not necessary, that are not positive and clean and refined. So Rashi explains these exact words. Let me read you the words of Rashi. Rashi says that this is to teach a person that he should always strive to use clean language, to speak in a refined way. In other words, since calling a non-kosher animal impure is not the cleanest, nicest way, tameh, impure, why do I have to say that? Better to say not pure. Now, this Rashi, this lesson of how to talk, really does not fit the way we are brought up in this country, the way Western civilization looks at speech. The way they say is you got to call a spade. I tell it like it is. Look at the politics. Look at the way the politicians talk. They're tweeting and all this stuff in such a blunt manner, in such a rough, coarse way. That's what the world tells us. The Torah says, no. That's not always the virtue. You have to know how to speak in a refined way. Let's get a little example. If you have to tell someone to something, so there's 2 ways you could tell them. You could be very rough, you could be very harsh, or you could say it in a very calm way. You could get the same message across. The difference is you're going to be more respected as a leader, as an authoritative figure to the people around you when you speak in a calm, nice, beautiful way. We deal with people all the time. Who do we deal with the most? Our children. When we speak to our children, let me give you a couple of examples of the things that I've fallen with and I've seen many times. You have your kids screaming in the car. What do you tell them? Stop screaming like an animal. You just sounded like an animal a little bit, the way you screamed. Why do you have to put them down like that? Why do you have to call them an animal? Why? For what? Why can't you just say, hey, it's okay to be frustrated, but I don't like it when you scream that way. You're much better than that. What a different message, but you're saying the same thing. But now he looks at you and says, oh my gosh, you speak in a refined way. You're an example of what I want to be like. Shlomo HaMelech actually writes this, and he writes it in Kohelet. He says, Divrei Chachamim benachat nishmaim. The words of the wise are heard when they're spoken gently. If adults need that advice, and if adults are open to this, how much more so children? They're so much more delicate. Listen to the words of Rav Shlomo Wolbe. Rav Shlomo Wolbe writes the following. He says in his work, unbelievable work, Ale Shur, he says the following, and I'll quote it. Only when parents speak calmly can they be the mechanech of their children. Words that are not spoken softly, gently, and patiently will not be accepted. So this message of Noah reverberates in our lives of how we talk to the people around us and our children. We want them to respect us. How do we talk to them? I'm not saying not to be firm and not to tell them what they need to hear, but you got to say it in a refined, gentle, calm. It could be forceful sometimes, but say it nicely. Let me give you a good idea of how you could ensure that you speak to your children the right way. Before you're about to speak or scream to your children, imagine for a moment that there's somebody watching. There's a your rabbi, people from the shul, people that you know, people from out there. Let's say mothers, you have ladies that you're good friends with. Imagine that person is standing right next to you. Would you speak that way to your child? If you wouldn't, then don't do it. Your child is just as important as that other person. There's a great rabbi, an inspiration to every person that's in Chinuch. It's Rabbi Shlomo Freifeld. He was a giant figure in Chinuch, and he passed away in 1994. He opened up a yeshiva called Shar Yashuv, which is still around today in Far Rockaway. And there are many stories about him. I found a couple of stories that I wanted to share with you that really highlight this idea of how you could educate and be mechanech in a positive way. His approach was all based on one pasuk: La'hayot ruach shefalim v'la'hayot lev nidakim. It's a pasuk that we find in Yeshayah, and over there, Yeshayahu, he says to revive the spirits of the lowly and to revive the hearts of the oppressed. He says that's what we have to do with people. Stop knocking them down. People that are already knocked down already. Try to lift them up. Let me give you two examples. He had a niece that she was, it was Som Gedalia, and she was patur from fasting. She was exempt from fasting. And he didn't like the fact that she was fasting when she wasn't supposed to. So how did she handle it? Did she say, why are you fasting? What are you doing? I don't understand. No. He went there and says, what did you eat for breakfast this morning? Wow. It's a very different way of getting the message across. There's another story, a very powerful story, of a student in his yeshiva that did an unforgivable thing that he had to be taken out of the yeshiva, something really, really bad. And that's the last thing Rav Shlomo Freifeld would ever do, to take a boy out of his yeshiva. I mean, it had to be something serious. And that boy's like, yeah, Rabbi Freifeld wants to meet with me. He's probably going to kick me out of the yeshiva. I don't care. Does he think, look, you think he probably has some words with you? You think I care what he has to say? I'm done. I'm finished. I'll do what I want to do. So he walked into the yeshiva. He walked into the Rabbi Shlomo Freifeld's office. A few minutes later, he comes out and he was white and he was shaking. And his friend said, what happened? Wow, Rabbi Freifeld must have really screamed at you. He must have really given it to you. He said, no, not really. I'll tell you what he said. He said to me, I'm so sorry that I wasn't big enough to lift you higher and make you greater. And with those words, he pierced the heart of this student. No screaming, no coarseness, no roughness. He said what he had to say. He had to kick him out of the yeshiva. But he did it in a way that showed how a person could be great. Let us work on the communication with our children. Let us work to understand that we hold the key. We have to give firm leadership to our children. We have to give them the right way to go. Sometimes we have to really tell them what's really tough to hear. We have to do it in a warm, correct way. Be'ezrat Hashem, we should take this lesson and all be able to survive and to grow and to thrive in this world. Shabbat Shalom.